My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 72 years old. For more than 4 decades, I tried to be the kind of wife who kept the peace, the kind of mother who never burdened her children, the kind of grandmother who always smiled. I thought that was enough. My husband, Robert Hayes, is 74. He still carries himself like the man who believes the world revolves around him. In our marriage, he handled the money, made the decisions, and expected silence when he spoke. I told myself that was his way of taking care of us. In truth, it was his way of taking control. Then there is Marissa, my daughter-in-law. She has been married to my son for 12 years, and from the very beginning she made it clear I was traditional, her polite word for outdated and irrelevant. Every holiday meal I cooked, every decoration I chose, every effort I made to keep family together was dismissed with a smirk. And my granddaughter Chloe, 16 years old, once ran into my arms whenever she visited. Now, she barely looks up from her phone. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as someone to love and started seeing me as someone to laugh at. Last night, I prepared dinner the way I always do. Robert's favorite roast, the good china, the silver polished by my own hands. I wanted foolishly to believe we could sit together as a family. But Robert started the evening with complaints. The house was too cold, the meat too dry, too many dishes. Marissa filled the silence with stories of her promotion and her plans to remodel their kitchen, her tone laced with the kind of superiority I've grown used to. Chloe giggled at her phone, sharing inside jokes with her mother, their laughter spilling across the table like a language I no longer understood. Still, I tried. I asked what was so funny. Robert turned to me with that look, the look I know too well. Not anger, not even irritation. Worse, the look of a man who finds his wife's very existence tiresome. Eleanor, he said, his words already slurred by beer, you wouldn't understand. It's a generational thing. Marissa added, some jokes just don't translate across age gaps. And Chloe, my Chloe, laughed harder. Something in me broke. I whispered, try me. I might surprise you. Robert reached for his wine glass. It was filled with the Cabernet I had bought for the occasion, thinking it might make the night feel special. He lifted it, looked at me with irritation, and tilted it. The dark red wine cascaded down my head, seeping into my hair, dripping onto the blouse I had ironed that afternoon. For 3 seconds the room was silent. Then Marissa burst out laughing. Chloe joined her, a teenager's giggle sharp and cruel. And Robert, the man I had lived beside for 44 years, chuckled too, as if humiliating me was nothing more than a joke. I sat there, wine dripping from my chin, feeling every year of my life pressing down on my shoulders. Then, without a word, I picked up my napkin, wiped my face carefully, and folded it neatly beside my plate. I stood, the chair scraping against the hardwood floors Robert always bragged about refinishing himself. Marissa smirked. Oh, Eleanor, she said through her laughter, you should see your face. I didn't respond. I walked to the closet, picked up my purse, and left through the front door. The night air was cool, sharp against my wet scalp. Behind me, their laughter echoed. Ahead of me, the streetlight flickered. 10 minutes later, as I sat in the grocery store parking lot, trying to breathe, 3 men in dark suits stepped into my living room asking for me. And that night, the night Robert Hayes poured wine on my head, became the night he lost the power he thought he would hold over me forever. 10 minutes after I left my house, while I was still sitting in the grocery store parking lot trying to catch my breath, my phone rang. Robert's name lit up the screen. For the briefest moment, I thought maybe he was calling to apologize. Maybe pouring wine over my head had finally crossed a line even he couldn't ignore. But when I answered, his voice was different. Not contrite, not even angry. It was uneasy, almost frightened. Eleanor, he said quickly, you need to come home. There are 3 men here, lawyers, I think. They're asking for you. They're talking about the house. I gripped the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the windshield. Wine still clung to my hair, sticky and sour. After 44 years of marriage, My husband's first instinct wasn't to ask if I was all right. It was to demand I rush back and fix a problem. "I'll be there when I'm ready," I told him, and hung up. When I finally pulled into the driveway half an hour later, I saw the black sedan parked out front. Through the living room window, three men in dark suits stood like shadows against the lamplight. Robert was pacing, gesturing wildly as he spoke. I walked to the door. Before I could knock, Robert yanked it open, his face red, his voice frantic. "Eleanor, finally. You need to clear this up. They're saying nonsense." He grabbed my arm, pulling me inside, ignoring the wine stains still visible on my blouse. The men stood politely. The oldest, with gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses, stepped forward. "Mrs. Hayes. My name is Jonathan Whitmore, from Whitmore and Associates. These are my colleagues, Mr. Alvarez and Mr. Chen. We apologize for disturbing you at home, but we've been trying to reach you for weeks." Robert cut in. "I told them they had the wrong person. I bought this house. I've made every payment. I have the receipts." Mr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses and opened a folder thick with papers. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Mr. Hayes, you did make the payments, yes, but not as the owner. As a tenant, this property has been solely in Miss Eleanor Hayes's name since 1981. The room went silent. I felt my knees weaken and sat down on the sofa, my sofa, apparently, in disbelief. Robert froze mid-step. "Tenant, that's impossible. I paid for this house. I signed the checks. I handled everything." Mr. Chen spoke gently, looking at me instead of Robert. "Mrs. Hayes, when your parents passed away in 1980, you inherited both funds and property. Our firm was instructed to handle the sale of their home and use those proceeds for the purchase of this house. The deed was drawn up in your name only, as your parents specifically requested." Memories I had buried long ago began to surface. My parents' car accident, the grief, Robert telling me not to worry about details, that he would handle everything. I had been too lost, too overwhelmed with a baby on my hip, to ask questions. "Your parents were very clear," Mr. Whitmore added. "They wanted any property purchased with their inheritance to remain yours alone, untouchable by anyone else. That clause has protected you all these years." I glanced at Robert. His face had drained of color. For the first time in decades, he looked small. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "We've been married 44 years. We built this life together." "Not legally," Mr. Alvarez replied evenly. "Legally. This house has always been Mrs. Hayes's property. Any attempt to transfer or refinance requires her signature, and hers alone." I looked around the living room. The wallpaper Robert had chosen, the furniture he insisted was practical, the mantel he decorated with his trophies. For 44 years, I had felt like a guest in my own home. But it wasn't his home at all. It had always been mine. That night, with wine still drying in my hair, I realized something Robert Hayes never had. He hadn't been the master of this house. He'd been living in mine. For a long moment, no one moved. The words, tenant, not owner, still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Robert finally broke the silence. His voice cracked, louder than it had been in years. "This is insane. I made every single mortgage payment, every repair, every bill for 44 years. You can't stand here and tell me I don't own my own home." Mr. Whitmore didn't flinch. He simply slid a document across the coffee table toward me. "This is the original deed, Mrs. Hayes. It bears your signature, dated 1981. Your parents' instructions were explicit. Your inheritance was to secure a home in your name alone. Mr. Hayes was never listed as owner." Robert snatched the papers, scanning them with shaking hands. His lips moved as though reading, but his eyes were wild, unfocused. "Forgery," he spat. "This has to be a mistake. A trick. Eleanor, you don't know anything about these things. They're confusing you." Before I could answer, Marissa appeared in the doorway from the kitchen. She must have heard every word, because her face was pale but her voice was sharp. "Wait, what are you saying? That Eleanor owns this house? The whole thing?" "Yes," Mr. Chen replied calmly. "The property has been solely in Mrs. Hayes's name since its purchase. Any financial contributions Mr. Hayes made were as a resident, not as an owner. Marissa's eyes flicked from the lawyers to Robert, then to me. And in that instant, I saw it calculation. She wasn't shocked or heartbroken. She was strategizing. "This doesn't change anything," she said firmly. "This is our family home. Eleanor wouldn't throw us out over a piece of paper." Her words stung more than I expected. Not my home. Our home. She didn't even pretend to see me as the rightful owner. Robert slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. "Damn right. I built this life. I raised our son here. I put my sweat into every corner of these walls. You think some technicality erases that?" I looked at him, really looked, for the first time in years. The man who had just hours earlier poured wine over my head now claimed ownership over a house he never legally possessed. "Robert," I said quietly, "this isn't a technicality. It's the truth." His face twisted with rage. "The truth. The truth is you don't understand what's going on here. You never have. You've never managed money, never dealt with banks or contracts. You've been living in a dream, Eleanor. And now these men come in with their fancy folders, and you think suddenly you're in control." Marissa placed a hand on his arm, her voice syrupy but hard underneath. "Calm down, Robert. We'll handle this. Eleanor doesn't want to live alone at her age. She needs us. She needs family." She turned to me then, her eyes narrowing like a blade. "You wouldn't survive without us. Eleanor, you wouldn't even know how." The room felt colder suddenly, though the air was still. I looked at her, at Robert, and then at the three men in suits who stood silently, waiting for me to claim the power I didn't even know I had. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was frightened or free. Robert was still muttering under his breath, clutching the deed like it was a piece of evidence in a trial he intended to win. Marissa sat straighter now, her tone icy as she spoke. "Let's stop pretending. Eleanor doesn't make decisions like this. She never has. Robert has always run this household. He's paid the bills, handled the repairs, made the sacrifices. She's just—" She hesitated, searching for a word, then settled on a caretaker. Caretaker. As if 44 years of silence, service, and survival amounted to nothing more than dusting shelves. Before Robert could nod in agreement, Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. He looked at me directly, and for the first time that evening, his voice softened. "Mrs. Hayes, there's something else you should know. Your parents left specific instructions when this house was purchased. They wanted to ensure you would never feel powerless in your own home." My chest tightened. What kind of instructions? He reached into his briefcase and removed a manila envelope. The edges were yellowed, the handwriting across the front unmistakably familiar. My father's steady cursive. "For Eleanor, to be opened only if she faces disrespect in her own home." I couldn't breathe for a moment. My father had died more than 40 years ago, but here he was, speaking to me through paper and ink. Whitmore continued. "Your parents included what we call a dignity clause. If at any point you feel disrespected, threatened, or diminished in your own property, you have the right to invoke it. Doing so grants you immediate and exclusive possession of this house. Anyone else living here would be given 30 days to leave." The words rang in my ears. Exclusive possession. 30 days to leave. Robert laughed, a harsh, nervous sound. "Disrespected. That's absurd. Eleanor isn't disrespected. She's treated just fine. We had a little spat at dinner, that's all." I touched my hair, still stiff with dried wine. The sour smell clung to me like a reminder. A little spat. Marissa leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Surely you don't mean you'd actually consider something so extreme, Eleanor? You wouldn't throw out your own husband, your own family, over some outdated clause. Outdated. Traditional. Dismissive words I'd heard all my life. I looked at them. My husband, my daughter, in law. My granddaughter who still hadn't lifted her eyes from her phone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. Outdated. I whispered. "No." Prepared. The room fell silent. And in that silence, I realized my parents had left me not just a house, but a choice. One I had been too blind, or too obedient, to see until now. Robert's laugh turned sharp, almost manic. He dropped the deed back on the coffee table and jabbed a finger toward me. Don't you dare, Eleanor. Don't you dare think you can throw me out of this house. I've lived here 4 years. I've built every inch of this life. You'd be nothing without me. His words landed heavy, the same way they had for decades. But tonight, something inside me shifted. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I simply watched him unravel. Marissa stepped in quickly, her voice smooth, her eyes calculating. Eleanor, let's be reasonable. You don't want to live here alone. Think about holidays, birthdays, Chloe's future. This house is our family's foundation. If you invoke this so-called clause, you'll destroy all of that. She glanced at the lawyers, then leaned closer, lowering her tone so only I could hear. And let's be honest, you're 72. Do you really think you can manage everything on your own? Bills, repairs, emergencies. Robert may not be perfect, but he's kept this house standing. Without him, without us, you'll crumble. Her words were honeyed poison. For years I might have believed them. But tonight I could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of me being alone, but fear of losing the comfort she had claimed in a home that was never hers. Robert's voice rose again. If you even think of using that clause, Eleanor, you'll regret it. You'll lose your son. You'll lose your granddaughter. Marissa will never forgive you, and Michael will take her side. Do you want to die alone in this house, remembered as the bitter old woman who kicked her family out? Chloe finally looked up from her phone, wide-eyed. Grandma, are you really thinking about it? Her voice trembled, not with worry for me, but with the dawning realization that her comfortable world might shift. I looked at all of them. The man who had poured wine on my head, the woman who smirked every time I tried to belong, the granddaughter who had learned to laugh at me instead of with me. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. I don't know yet, I said softly, my voice steady enough to quiet the room. But I do know this. I've been living like a guest in my own home for far too long. The clock in the hallway ticked, each second louder than the last. The lawyers exchanged glances but said nothing, waiting for me to decide. Robert's knuckles were white against the arm of his chair. Marissa's jaw tightened. Chloe held her breath. And for the first time in 4 years, every pair of eyes in that room was on me, waiting. The silence after my words felt heavier than the wine had on my skin. Mr. Whitmore broke it gently. Mrs. Hayes, if you choose to invoke the clause, our firm can file paperwork within 24 hours. Once filed, your husband and any other residents would have 30 days to vacate. During that time, you remain sole and uncontested owner of the property. Robert shot to his feet. This is madness. She doesn't know what she's saying. Eleanor, you've never handled a single legal document in your life. You don't even understand how mortgages work. He turned on the lawyers. You can't just let a 72-year-old woman, who's clearly confused, make a decision like this. It's irresponsible. Marissa seized the opening, her voice slow but firm. Exactly. Eleanor has been forgetful lately. She misplaces things. She repeats herself. This clause, if it even exists, was never meant to be abused because of a moment of emotion. We'll be challenging her competency in court if she goes through with this. Competency. The word cut through me like glass. In their eyes, I wasn't just outdated anymore. I was senile. I felt my pulse in my ears, but Mr. Chen leaned forward calmly. Mrs. Hayes, you should know. Your parents anticipated this possibility. The trust they left includes provisions for full legal and medical support if your capacity is ever questioned. If they attempt such a challenge, we can arrange an independent evaluation with a physician of your choice. Robert barked a laugh, though it sounded forced. Good luck passing that test, Eleanor. You've lived in my shadow for so long. You don't even know how to make real decisions. What will you do when they put you under a doctor's questions? Forget your own birthday. Marissa's lips curled into a cold smile. Eleanor, it's not too late to stop this nonsense. All you have to do is say you don't want to use the clause. Then everything can go back to normal. Back to normal. I pictured the roast cooling on the table, the sound of laughter at my expense, the sting of wine dripping into my eyes. Normal was the prison I had lived in for 4 years. I straightened in my chair, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. Then I'll take the evaluation. I have nothing to hide. The room shifted. Robert's smirk faltered. Marissa's confidence dimmed just slightly. For the first time, I realized their threats weren't proof of strength. They were proof of fear. The appointment was set for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Robert thought it would break me. Marissa even whispered loud enough for me to hear. She won't last 10 minutes. She'll freeze. But when I stepped into Dr. Richard Steinberg's office, I felt something I hadn't in years resolve. The waiting room smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. Beige walls, stiff chairs, an uninspiring place. Yet when Dr. Steinberg appeared, tall and thin with kind eyes behind silver glasses, he didn't treat me like a patient. He treated me like a person. Mrs. Hayes, he said warmly, I've read the petition your family filed, and I've reviewed the documents from Whitmore and Associates. This is quite unusual. I managed a small smile. Unusual how? In 45 years of practice, he said, leading me into his office lined with shelves of psychology texts and family photos. I've rarely seen families question a loved one's competency immediately after they discover that loved one controls significant assets. He said it gently, but the meaning was clear. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. The evaluation lasted nearly 3 hours. He asked me to remember lists of words, to solve problems, to interpret contracts. He asked about current events, about my childhood, about my marriage. He asked me to explain in my own words what was happening with the house. And I did, clearly calmly, without stumbling once. When it ended, he set down his pen and looked at me with something like admiration. Mrs. Hayes, you show no signs whatsoever of dementia or diminished capacity. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sound. Your understanding of your legal situation is sharper than many half your age. Relief washed through me, but he wasn't finished. There is something I need to say, though. You've described a long pattern of being excluded from decisions, of being told you're incapable, of being humiliated in front of others. That isn't protection, Mrs. Hayes. It's what we call financial and emotional abuse. The word struck like thunder. Abuse, I had never thought of it that way. Robert wasn't violent. He never hit me, never screamed, never threatened. But the constant dismissals, the way he made me feel like a guest in my own home, the way Marissa smirked every time I tried to belong, was that abuse. Dr. Steinberg's voice was steady, kind, but unflinching. You've lived under control disguised as care. That's why this test was never about your mind, Eleanor. It was about your freedom. When I left his office, I walked taller than I had in years. For the first time, I understood I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my dignity. 3 days after the evaluation, I received a call from Mr. Whitmore. Mrs. Hayes, he said, your husband and daughter-in-law have requested a family meeting. They want to discuss what they're calling a reasonable compromise. Compromise. After 4 decades of being silenced, suddenly they wanted compromise. At 7 o'clock that evening, I returned to the house that, in the eyes of the law, had always been mine. Robert was in his usual armchair, shoulders hunched but eyes alert. Marissa sat on the sofa, legs crossed, posture sharp as a knife. Chloe perched on the floor, knees drawn up, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Robert stood when I entered. Eleanor, thank you for coming home. His voice was measured, rehearsed. We've all done some thinking. Maybe we haven't always been considerate. But 4 years of marriage counts for something, doesn't it? We don't want to throw that away. Marissa leaned forward, her smile tight. Here's what we're proposing. You come home, we live together as before. In exchange, you add Robert's name to the deed. That way, there's security. No one can just throw anyone out. Her words landed heavy. No one can throw anyone out. Except that's exactly what they feared, being thrown out. Robert's voice softened, almost pleading. We'll be more respectful. We'll include you in decisions. Things will change, Eleanor. I promise. For decades, I had longed to hear that promise. But tonight, all I could hear was the echo of laughter as wine dripped down my face. Chloe's small voice broke the silence. Grandma, I promised not to laugh at you anymore. That was mean. I'm sorry. It was the most genuine apology in the room, and for a moment my heart ached. But apologies from children don't erase the cruelties of adults. I looked at them all. Robert, who still thought control was love. Marissa, who feared losing comfort more than losing me. Chloe, who was just beginning to learn which side of cruelty was safer to stand on. What if I say no? I asked quietly. The air shifted. Marissa's smile vanished. Robert's jaw clenched. Marissa's voice turned sharp. Think carefully, Eleanor. If you force us out, you'll be alone. No family dinners. No holidays. No one to care for you when you're sick. Is that what you want? To die in this house, forgotten? Robert tried again, softer. We've built a life together, Eleanor. Doesn't that matter more than some clause in an old will? I stood slowly, my hands steady, my voice stronger than I thought possible. What matters, I said, is that for the first time in 4 years, this house is truly mine. My life is truly mine, and I will not give that back. The room fell silent. Even the ticking clock in the hallway seemed to pause. For the first time, I saw fear in Robert's eyes, not of losing a house, but of losing control. And in that moment, I knew. Their bargain was no bargain at all. It was a chain, and I was done being chained. The next morning, Mr. Whitmore filed the paperwork. By noon, the notice was official. All other residents had 30 days to vacate. Robert didn't speak to me that entire day. He stormed through the house, slamming doors, muttering about betrayal. At one point, I heard him in the garage, banging tools against the workbench as though sheer noise could reclaim the authority he had lost. Marissa, on the other hand, grew sharper with each passing hour. She paraded through the kitchen with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying to every corner. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's 72, for God's sake. We'll fight this. Michael will be on our side. Just wait. But no matter how loudly she schemed, the law was silent, steady, immovable, like the walls of the house itself. Even Chloe seemed subdued. She spent hours in her room, no music, no laughter, only the occasional creak of the floorboards when she moved. When she finally came down for dinner, she glanced at me and whispered, "Grandma, do you really want us to leave?" The question twisted in my chest. Did I? I loved her. I loved Michael, even if he lived far away. For years I told myself I loved Robert too, or at least I loved the man he used to be. But love is not obedience. Love is not humiliation. Yes, Chloe, I said softly. I want to live in my own house. That doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I need to love myself too. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Hurt, maybe, or understanding. Then she looked away. The days passed slowly. Boxes appeared in the hallways. Robert dragged his workshop tools into the driveway, loading them into his old pickup truck. Marissa packed with clipped movements, muttering curses under her breath. Chloe folded her clothes silently, earbuds in, her face unreadable. And I, after 44 years, watched it all happen, not with triumph, not with regret, with presence. For once, I was not invisible. I was the center. On the 30th morning, I stood on the porch as the moving truck pulled away. Robert didn't look back. Marissa slammed the car door with more force than necessary. Chloe sat in the back seat, her face pressed to the window, her eyes on me until the car disappeared down the street. Silence settled over the house like a blanket. For the first time in decades, there was no television blaring in the background, no sharp voice cutting through the kitchen, No footsteps pacing angrily across the floors. Just the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the soft creak of the house breathing with me. I walked room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the windows. For so long, these things had felt like cages. Now they felt like mine, truly mine. And though loneliness pricked at the edges of my heart, another feeling grew stronger: freedom. The morning after the house fell silent, I woke up to birdsong instead of Robert's grumbling. For the first time in 44 years, I didn't rush to make coffee the way he liked it. I brewed it exactly the way I liked it, strong, with cinnamon sprinkled on top. The smallest act felt like rebellion. By mid-morning, a locksmith arrived. At Mr. Whitmore's suggestion, I changed every lock in the house. Holding the new brass keys in my palm, I realized how extraordinary it was. After all these years, only I held the right to open these doors. The second thing I did was drive to the paint store. When the young clerk asked what kind of room I was painting, I surprised myself by answering, all of them. For decades, Robert had insisted on neutral colors, beige walls, brown curtains, furniture that was practical, and nothing more. That day, I chose colors that spoke to me: sunshine yellow for the kitchen, ocean blue for the living room, a warm green for the bedroom, even a bold lavender for the guest room, no, for my office. It took weeks. I hired painters for the ceilings and did the trim myself. My hands unsteady at first, but growing more confident with each brushstroke. Every streak of color across the walls felt like an act of reclamation. This was no longer Robert's domain. It was my sanctuary. When the furniture was rearranged, I stood in the middle of the living room and laughed out loud. For years, Robert's chair had dominated the space, angled perfectly toward the television. Without it, the room felt lighter, brighter, as if even the walls had been waiting for him to leave. But it wasn't just the house I was rebuilding. It was me. I enrolled in online courses through the community college: real estate law, financial planning, even art history, because I'd always loved paintings but never felt smart enough to study them. Sitting at my new desk in my lavender office, surrounded by stacks of books Robert once called silly, I felt sharper than I had in decades. Sometimes the silence still felt heavy. At night, I caught myself listening for footsteps that would never come. But instead of dread, there was peace. I could turn the thermostat to whatever temperature I wanted. I could read until dawn without someone mocking me for leaving a lamp on. Freedom, I discovered, is built from the smallest details. One afternoon, as I planted flowers in the garden, a garden Robert always dismissed as a waste of time, I realized something. I hadn't just survived 44 years of dismissal. I had been preparing for this moment. Every quiet compromise, every swallowed word had brought me here. And now, for the first time in my life, the house was not just where I lived. It was where I belonged. It had been nearly 2 months since Robert and Marissa left. The house was painted. The garden was blooming, and my office was filled with books and notes from the classes I'd enrolled in. For the first time in decades, I woke up each morning without dread. Then one Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there was Michael, my son, with Chloe beside him. Michael looked older than his 43 years, lines of worry etched around his eyes, his shoulders tense. Chloe shifted nervously, her phone tucked in her pocket for once. "Hi, Mom," Michael said softly. "Hello, Michael." My voice caught, but I held my ground. Chloe burst forward. "Grandma, can I see your office? Mom said you painted it purple and made it all yours." Her eagerness broke something in me. I smiled and stepped aside. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She ran past me, her footsteps quick and light up the stairs. That left Michael and me in the foyer, standing where so many arguments had once echoed. He cleared his throat. "Mom, I owe you an apology." I said nothing, waiting. "When this all started, I thought you were losing it. Dad and Marissa made it sound like you'd lost perspective, like you were being irrational. I believed them." He rubbed the back of his neck. "But seeing this house, seeing you, it's different. You look strong." The words landed like a bomb and a wound all at once. I had waited decades for recognition from my own son, yet it hurt that it came so late. "I'm learning, Michael," I said gently. "I've taken classes. I'm studying real estate finances. Things your father told me I'd never understand." He looked around the freshly painted walls, the tidy entryway. I guess he was wrong. Upstairs, I heard Chloe gasp. "Grandma, you have your own desk and all these books." Her joy floated down the staircase like sunlight. Michael's eyes softened. "She really misses you. We both do." "But Marissa," he trailed off, sighing. "She thinks you betrayed the family. She's still furious." I felt a flicker of old guilt, the kind I used to carry like a second skin. But it faded quickly. "I didn't betray anyone, Michael. I simply reclaimed what was already mine." He nodded slowly, then met my eyes. "Are you happy, Mom? Really happy?" I thought of the mornings spent with coffee the way I liked it, the evenings reading in silence without ridicule, the garden blooming in colors I had chosen. "I am," I said, "happier than I've been in years. Sometimes lonely, yes, but free. And freedom is worth the loneliness." At that moment, Chloe came bounding down the stairs, her eyes shining. "Grandma, can I come stay with you sometimes? Like on weekends?" "I love it here." Michael looked startled, but he didn't stop her. He turned to me instead. "Would you want that?" My throat tightened. I reached for Chloe's hand, squeezing gently. "Yes, sweetheart. But when you're here, you treat me with respect. No laughing at me the way you did before. Can you promise that?" She nodded solemnly. "I promise." For the first time, I saw not just a granddaughter, but a young woman learning what respect meant. As they left that evening, Michael lingered at the doorway. "Mom, I don't know where things go from here, but I want to try, if you'll let me." I smiled faintly. Trying is all I've ever asked for. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet house, my heart heavy yet strangely full. I had lost a husband, a daughter, in-law, the life I once thought permanent. But I had gained something far more valuable, a beginning. And at 72, I was just learning how powerful beginnings can be. The weeks after Michael and Chloe's visit passed quickly. For the first time in years, I had a calendar full of things that were mine alone. Online classes, gardening projects, even a book club at the local library I had once been too timid to join. But one afternoon, as I sat in my lavender office surrounded by textbooks, I came across something in my financial planning course that made me pause. Case studies of women who had lost control of their assets because they trusted the wrong people. Husbands, sons, even their own daughters-in-law. Their stories sounded too familiar, too much like mine. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thought, what if I could use my story to help them? The next day, I called Mr. Whitmore. "Do you think," I asked cautiously, "it would be possible for me to set up some kind of fund? Something to help older women who don't know they have rights?" There was a long pause, then his warm chuckle. "Mrs. Hayes, with your assets, you could start a foundation if you wanted to. You have more power than you realize." The word lingered, power. I had spent a lifetime without it. Now it felt strange and heavy in my hands. I began slowly. I attended free workshops at the community center, introducing myself not as Robert's wife, not as someone's grandmother, but simply as Eleanor. I listened to women speak about their fears, losing homes, being dismissed by their families, feeling invisible. I knew every word because I had lived them too. Soon I was speaking up, sharing my own story in fragments. Never the full tale, just enough to let them know they weren't alone. Their eyes lit up, some with relief, some with recognition. One evening, after I spoke about financial dignity, at a small gathering, a woman about my age took my hands. Her voice trembled. I thought I was the only one. "My husband handles everything. He says I wouldn't understand. I thought that was normal." I squeezed her hands. That's exactly what I thought too, until I realized normal isn't the same as right. Her tears fell, and mine weren't far behind. the seed of something larger had been planted. At home, I started drafting notes for what I would later call the Hayes Foundation for Women's Independence. I didn't tell Michael yet. I knew Marissa would sneer, call it dramatic. But maybe Chloe would understand. One night as I locked up the house, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For years, I'd seen a woman worn down by compromises, by laughter at her expense, by silence she had mistaken for peace. Now, staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. Someone standing taller, eyes steadier, shoulders no longer bent. I whispered to that reflection, "This is just the beginning." And I believed it. It started with a phone call. A woman from the local university had heard about the small talks I'd been giving at the community center. She wanted me to speak at their annual conference on aging and independence. "Just 20 minutes," she said brightly. "Share your story. You'd inspire so many." My first instinct was to say no. For 72 years, I had lived in silence. Even now, with the house mine and the locks changed, I still flinched at the thought of stepping too far outside. But then I remembered the woman who had gripped my hands after my last talk, whispering that she thought she was alone. If I didn't speak, how many more women would stay silent, thinking their cages were normal? So I said yes. The auditorium was modest, but to me it looked vast. As I stood at the podium, the lights hot on my face, my hands trembled at first. But when I opened my mouth, the words came like water long dammed up. I told them about 4 years of normal, about the wine glass, about the laughter, about the envelope with my father's handwriting, waiting decades for me to be ready. The room was silent when I finished. Not the silence of dismissal I had lived with, but the silence of listening. Then the applause rose, louder than I had ever heard in my life. Afterward, Michael found me backstage. He looked shaken but not angry. "Mom," he said slowly, "I had no idea. I'm proud of you." Chloe rushed forward before I could answer, hugging me tightly. "Grandma, everyone was clapping for you. You were amazing." For a moment, surrounded by my son and granddaughter, I felt something I hadn't in decades, not just free, but seen. That night, back in my quiet house, I sat on the porch as the sky darkened. My phone buzzed with messages, organizers inviting me to speak again, women asking for advice, reporters wanting interviews. The world, it seemed, had found me. And yet, as the stars appeared one by one, I wondered, did I want that? I had fought so hard for this silence, this freedom to choose my own colors, my own mornings, my own life. Was I ready to trade it for microphones and headlines? Inside, the house glowed softly with the colors I had chosen. Outside, the garden swayed in the night breeze, alive with blooms I had planted. For the first time in 72 years, the choice was mine alone. I closed my eyes, letting the question settle in my chest, not as a burden, but as a promise. Because whether I chose the quiet life of a gardener or the bright stage of an advocate, one truth would never change: this was my house. This was my life. And finally, at last, it was mine to decide. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to realize that silence is not peace, and obedience is not love. Eleanor's story is not just about a house. It's about dignity, choice, and the courage to reclaim what should have been hers all along. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. It's never too late to start over, to stand up, and to live a life that belongs to you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Telling Story with Me, because every voice matters, and yours might be the next one that changes everything.